We're going to talk about mistakes that could happen in the kitchen. What happens if they do happen? And how do we avoid mistakes of that nature? So on page Chav Daled Halacha Chaf. So on the onset, one should not take a meat knife. It's pretty obvious. You shouldn't take a meat knife, even if it's clean and cold, and don't use that to cut a block of cheese, because you're mixing up the wrong kind, and then now you're going to have residue of cheese on the knife. It's not proper to do so. If someone did do so, and the knife was clean, and it wasn't a sharp product, maybe, but after the fact, it could be okay, but it's not acceptable to do so before the fact. He said, one's not allowed to, from the onset, cut cheese with a meat knife, even if it's clean and cold. Furthermore, one should not take a meat knife and use it to cut bread for a dairy meal, which is why we have the concept known as a challah knife or a bread knife, which is parv. And the reverse is the same problem. To take a dairy knife and cut bread for a meat meal would also be problematic. Because the blade of the knife often and sometimes can have some residue, and therefore won't be fully clean. Now, if we have no other knife, we're in the wilderness and we're stuck. We only have our pocket knife, and the pocket knife happens to be meat, and it's clean. Can I use that to cut the bread I'm going to have with my yogurt? Yes. If you have nothing else to do, if you're really stuck, there's an interesting klal, an interesting principle in Jewish law, that shas hadchak, which means a situation of duress, has the same din, the same Jewish principle as after the fact. Whatever is permissible after the fact may be done before the fact if you're under duress. So if you're out camping in the middle of the wilderness and you're going to go hungry, that's considered to be a shas hadchak, a situation of duress. Even if you're not camping, if you have nothing else to do. Okay. If you have no other knife, there's a way to clean the blade of the knife. This would make a great TikTok video, by the way, or anyone who's looking into videos, just call me after class, we can take care of this. There's a concept in Jewish law of how to clean the blade of the knife. I mean, can you imagine? This would be entertainment for years. You take the knife, you go outside, find untouched earth, and you stab it in the ground 10 times. This could be like a ritual, some kind of very mystical, interesting ritual. Why is it? What's the whole idea? The concept is that when you take the knife and you stab it into the ground, untouched earth, the friction of the knife going into the earth will kind of be like a little abrasive. It's going to rub the knife, going to clean it of any residue. Today, you can be inside your kitchen, and you don't have to go outside. You could take a piece of steel wool and accomplish the same thing. So what Jewish law speaks about, taking the knife and putting it into untouched earth 10 times, can equally be accomplished. It says in today's halachic rabbinic authorities say the same thing could be accomplished with steel wool, because again, you have that abrasive effect, right? And you're going to clean the blade. Okay, so Mitzvah Shem, when you're going to get married and you're going to shop for housewares, you have separate dishes for dairy, separate for meat, with different patterns, so that you're not going to get confused, you're not going to get mixed up. In commercial settings, like commercial kitchens where they don't have anything fancy, it's all just functional. So what they'll do is they'll take spray paint, they'll paint the outside so you have colors, they'll designate what's what. In terms of the colors, sometimes they'll etch certain things on them. If they're both of the same pattern, what do? You're supposed to etch the dairy side, not the meat side. If you're only etching one side, etch the dairy side. If you're doing a siman, if you're doing colors, you can do on both sides. But if you're making an etch a siman, do on the dairy side, not on the meat side. Because the minhag, Jewish tradition, is to make a a simon on the dairy side. A person's going to come to your house. You're going to have a guest coming to your house. They're going to see that one of the patterns is etched. They'll say it must be the dairy side. And if you reversed the custom and you etched the meat side, they're going to come to make a mistake and they'll use a meat dish, meat pot that is, or a dairy dish, which is a problem. And now, why is it that the minhag Yisrael is dafka to make a simon on the dairy side? If you look in the Ha'ara on the bottom of page Peiches, footnote Peiches, in Matzah Remez that is based on a pasuk in Shmuel, Besaseres Chartzei Hazohav, Chartzei Hachalav, that is, excuse me, Charitzi Chalav, which means the engraving of the dairy. Speaking about something with dairy, so use the word Charitzi, which refers to the indenting or the engraving of the dairy. So we see the word engraving is associated with dairy, which is the minhag Yisrael. There was even a story where there was a blood libel against the Yidden, and the way the Yidden defended this blood libel, there was a knife that had said on it Pisari, and the alleged thing was that it was used to murder a non-Jewish child and to use the blood for the matzah, the whole baloney story. So the Rav who had to defend the story in court called in a non-Jewish housekeeper, and he asked her how many houses she worked in many Jewish homes, and she testified that in all the Jewish homes that she worked in, only the dairy knives were marked, were etched. They didn't etch the meat side. So if this knife says on the Bisari, it's etched on the meat side, it's obviously not coming from a Jewish home. And that served as evidence to defend against the blood libel, the minhag Yisrael. Okay, now we're going to talk about salt. Generally speaking, salt is used to add flavor and to enhance foods. Some children eat salt as a dish for itself. I've seen it happen. You have like a little dish, and the salt inside the somehow should be put on the table. There you take the bread, you dip it inside the bowl, or you can actually take with your fingers. The minhag was to have designated bowls. You have a dairy bowl of salt, and you have a meat bowl of salt. Why? What's the reason for this? Because if you're fingering it, then there's the accentuated possibility and likelihood that some residue of food is going to go into the salt. Right? You can't be sharing that with meat and dairy then. But today we've become modern. We have a new invention. We have a salt shaker. We don't have to actually put our fingers inside the salt. We can take this dish that has little holes in it and start shaking it over the food we want. Then we don't really have the concern about sticking our fingers inside. So we spread the salt on the food. Much easier, right? It's not so common, not so likely for the salt to touch the food. Then you don't have to have separate salt shakers, one for dairy, one for meat. You can have one. Still, some people have the minhag to designate one for dairy, one for meat. Now, I want to explain something about this, and then I'll take your question. This kind of depends. And there are some things which I would call good manufacturing practices. We have this in the food industry, so I'll call them good house practices. And that is when you're spraying or sprinkling salt or spices into a pot. So let's say you're making chicken soup. It's not a good idea to take the salt or the spices and pour them directly over a steaming pot, because then you have the zeya, the steam of the pot, directly affecting the spices, and it can render the spices flaky. So what should you do? That's why we have a second hand. Thank God, it comes in handy, pun intended. So you go like this, and then you go like that. So now you're creating a buffer, and the steam of the pot's not going directly onto your spice, and the spices remain hard. And the same should be done with the salt. And the same would be, for example, a ketchup container. Right? Today, Americans eat ketchup with everything. Ketchup, you can't survive without ketchup. So you have ketchup with the pizza and ketchup with the schnitzel. So just be mindful when you're pouring the ketchup on the plate, not to mamish have like a whole fabringen with a ketchup touch the pizza, it's very greasy, it's not, then it becomes milk, it's a problem. So just be a little bit more, create a little distance for it. And the same would be with the schnitzel, then the ketchup bottle will remain truly part, and you don't have a problem. You don't want to start having separate ketchup bottles in the refrigerator. Jewish refrigerators are crowded enough. We don't want to create any more issues. Now, what about now? That's halacha chafal. Chavbeis gets into yes.
So you answered one of my questions with the salt. If you have a plate with like schnitzel on it and you want to put hot sauce on it, I've been at a meal where they've had me pour it like from up here, but there's no steam coming off the meat. What is the best? Like in someone else's home, I'll do it, but in my own home, do I need to do it all the way up here?
You could do it a different way. You could even, if let's say you have a plate here, and let's say the meat's over here, you could pour the hot sauce over here. If you want to pour it directly on the meat, it depends how hot the meat is. If the meat is steaming hot, it could be an issue. But if it's not too hot to touch, it's not a problem. So it really depends on the temperature of the meat. Now, what about food left over from a meat meal? We have it every Shabbat, right? You have a fleishig meal, you have leftover foods. What's the status of this? So what's interesting, we're going to talk about the challah board. Most homes have a challah board. The challah board is kind of like an island. It's an oasis. So even though I have a meat meal and everyone's plate is presumed to be actual meat, the challah board itself is like a floating island for itself, has its own status. Because people don't, in a civilized table, I mean, that is, they don't go and put their greasy fingers and touch everything on the challah board. You take from the challah board, take a piece and put it to your plate. Once the piece is by your plate, we have to assume it's taking on the status of whatever you're eating. You're having a meat meal, this challah has to be assumed as places at this point. But as long as it's on the challah board and you're cutting it with a carving knife, it's still in parv zone. It hasn't yet moved away to the other zone. Also, okay, we have meat placemats, we have dairy placemats, we use them for the right kind, we don't mix them up. Now we turn to page 26. Leftover bread on the table. After a meat meal. Also, one's not allowed to eat it with a dairy meal with the opposite kind because we have to be on the safe side and presume that there's some residue. We're talking about the pieces that were cut from the challah board, put by your plate. Okay. Because the person's not going to be mindful to make sure they don't touch any meat. You're chilling, you're enjoying the meal, and you're just doing whatever needs to be done. But the actual loaf of bread that's in the parv island, right, the parv zone, challah board, etc. The people generally speaking are careful that shouldn't actually touch the roast or the meat or the chicken that's on the table. One would be allowed to presume that challah remains parv. So if you have leftovers, so you have a half a loaf, a quarter of a loaf left over, and you know it stayed on the challah board, you could put that away and have it for a dairy meal later. We're talking about presumptively at a meal that's a civilized meal where people are using cutlery, right? And they're not going around with greasy fingers full of chicken fat or meat and touching everything. If you have some children that are uncivilized and they're just doing whatever they want, you can't control them. Maybe taka the bread is not going to be part anymore. You never know. Maybe they came and said, "Oh, I want this piece" or whatever. Then you have to be mindful of that, or you have to figure out a way to discipline the children better. I don't know. Okay. So before you switch over to a dairy meal, take away the foods that were eaten together with the meat. So again, it's about being mindful whether or not something really retains its parv status or not. So if it came in close proximity to meat, or in the reverse, the dairy, then it loses the parv status. If not, if we know mindfully that it did not, then it retains its parv status. Okay? This gets into another question. What about a sports cap water bottle. Or one of those, people have bottles of it, we go around with, there's to drink all the time, right? So we have these different water bottles, or we can use them for tea, whatever it is. You sometimes will use that for a meat meal or dairy meal, and the drink inside is part. So the vessel itself didn't really become any status, but you have to wash the spout. If you know there could be residue, you'd have to wash the spout out well first before, if you're going to switch the type of food. That's a general answer. Yeah.
Should you use, like, if you have a meat meal, a meat sponge to clean the water bottle? Or,
Depends. It's a good question. If the water bottle is really just part, I would just clean the spout without a sponge with my hand with some soap, rub it thoroughly. Then it just keeps it's just easier that way. If you start using a sponge and create new problems, which we don't need to introduce. If you did already after the fact and the soap, it probably wouldn't be a problem, but it's better not to do that. Yeah.
with kids who are really greasy beans,
I've never heard such a thing. What do you mean?
maybe it's just my nephews.
No, I'm kidding. It's possible. It can happen.
Is it easiest just to have separate like cups, sipping cups, whatever, for meat and dairy meals?
So for a young child, it's also different because a young child doesn't even have to wait between dairy and meat. You just can't feed them dairy and meat together. So they don't really have to have separate sippy cups. If you just fed them, let's say, a meat meal, or you drink from a sippy cup, you can just wash the spout, just so there should be no residue, but you don't have to worry about any waiting time. I think it's that nature. Okay, now we're going to talk about ovens. Ovens. How is it possible? That's a good question. How is it possible that you can get an airline meal or a TV dinner, as they call them, double sealed, heated up in a treifa microwave or treifa oven together with treifa food, and the food is still kosher? So it's double wrapped. So what does double wrapping do?
Isn't it the law of the two pots or something?
Creates a barrier. So you're not going to have any liquidity touching the inner layer, and the outer layer and the inner layer are dry. So it's just, you don't have any non-kosher liquid touching the outside layer of the kosher vessel. You're creating that barrier. Now, let's take this concept and extrapolate. Let's say we have only one oven, and we designated the oven to be of a meat status because we happen to use more meat dishes than dairy dishes. Could be either way. Someone can do the reverse. They can designate the oven to be dairy status because most of the time they have dairy, they only have meat on Shabbos once a week. Yeah, let's do it that example. Go with that example. So this oven is dairy, and once a week they use it for meat. So if you double wrap the meat or the chicken, whatever you're baking in the oven, you can responsibly and perfectly put such a thing into the oven, double covered, and it's not a problem. And now I'll tell you a little story. Not a big story, just a little story. About 6 months ago, approximately, I was on a little vacation with my wife. We had a choice. We could either stay in a hotel or an Airbnb. We discussed the option. Airbnb was the better choice. Part of the reason it was a better choice is because that's a full kitchen. Hotels don't have that. And all I did was I took a very large disposable 9 by 13, I think it was, or maybe even a bigger pan. That's why they make them for the Jewish people. And then I took a smaller one, both of them had covers, and I put my kosher food in the inner, I think, I don't know the sizes, excuse my ignorance, and they put inside there, covered, and I took the larger cover, covered, so it's double covered, put in a treifa oven. I left it in there for hours, I don't know, 2-3 hours, hot food. We had a proper meal. And it's easy. So wherever you're going, you can know, you can always do, they can double wrap the food. You can also get a hot potato wherever you go in the world. That's why they make silver foil. You double wrap the silver foil twice, put it into the oven, and there you go. I had another story, and I've told this to you, maybe not, because if you heard it from me, it's just close your ears. Years ago, I was on a business trip, and I was in Connecticut. And I had my food, so a full day of work, and I came to the hotel, and I have a little cooking device, it was a toaster oven. It died on me. Of all times, in the middle of my trip, I'm like, oh, what? I'm a rabbi, I know what to do. So I said, okay, this one is garbage. I left this over there. They actually thought I left it. I left it on purpose. I told them it's not working. I went downstairs to the lobby, brought my food. I said, would it be possible to warm something up in your oven? So we came back, sure. I said, but I keep kosher. I have to supervise it the whole time. Okay. So they gave me foil. I double wrapped my food, and I put it in a tray for oven, and it was on in a microwave. It was a convection oven. I stood by the door. I was a mashgiach. I learned my Rambam for half an hour, came out, and I went upstairs. I had a hot meal, and I wasn't cranky anymore. Everything was fine. So there's a way to do things. If you have double wrapped food, you can pretty much go anywhere and you have options. So this is like what you call like the Jewish hack, the hack of Jewish living. Have hot food wherever you go, just have to double cover it. Okay? Now, Tanner gas chashmal, if you have a gas oven or an electric oven, one should not bake or roast whatever food, dairy and meat together in the same oven at the same time. No, it's a no-no. Why? Because the taste and the smell, the aroma, the wolf is going to go from one to the other. It's a problem. And similarly, what happens if I bake bread together with meat? One should not eat that bread with dairy because it was affected by the steam of the meat. Which means that bread should be eaten only together with meat or could be eaten carved, but you don't have to wait 6 hours after eating the bread, but you don't eat it together with dairy. But one after another, if the oven is clean, would not be problematic. Let me explain this because it's a very loaded statement. I need to explain it properly. And before I even get to that statement, I want to say another statement. For those of you that have been to my house, you know that my wife makes sourdough. Sourdough is made in a Dutch oven, right? And those clay pots. And as far as I know, although I don't know for sure, as far as I know, it's meant to be covered most of the time or the whole time. If you keep it covered the whole time, and the bread is a dry food, it's really not a problem. It really remains hot, actually. In a kosher oven, it's really okay. If you open it up and then it's a meat oven, then you can get into the question. You could be ready to take on that step. Now, another thing I wanted to say is that bread itself is not the kind of food that really emits steam. It's a dry food. How do you define a food that has liquidity to it? If you were to take a bread, right? Let's say I buy myself a new kapata. I spend $800 for a silk kapata, and I rub it on my lapel. The bread's not going to make any oil stain there because it's dry. I just brush off the crumbs and I'm good to go. On the other hand, if I take another food, take pizza, for example, right? You rub it on here, $100 at the cleaners, right? Issue. So it's a big difference. So if you have a dried food, it doesn't really give off steam. So dry foods are really not a problem. So one dry food after another dry food wouldn't really be a problem. That's if the oven is clean. But the thing is, the ovens are not sparkling clean because you have spillage, right? So if the oven is sparkling clean that you'd show it off to your mother-in-law, then it's clean. But if it's not, most ovens presumably have some kind of residue, and really you should go through a cleaning first before you can assume that they're clean. Another like Jewish hack, if you will, to avoid an issue of spillage, if you want, you can put a piece of heavy-duty foil under the rack where the food is, so that anything that spills will be caught there, it won't be sitting on the oven floor and camping out there for 3 weeks. Okay, so that's the idea. Okay. Fine. Now, Abdallah gets into the question, can you use the oven for meat and dairy at the same time? The answer is no. It explains why. Unless one is covered. And the same question, by the way, this question actually has universal relevance. I'll take your question in a moment. The same question would be, I'm baking fish in a parva oven, which is perfectly fine to do. And I'm also have vegetables inside there. We know that we don't mix fish and meat together. Can I eat those vegetables with the meat? No. So one should be mindful when you're cooking the vegetables, the fish should be in the oven either by itself, or it could be covered, or it could be in the oven when something else is covered. But if the other thing is open, then you don't have it together with meat. You could do it, but don't have it with meat because you're not supposed to have the hard vegetables, whatever it is, with meat if they were cooked together with fish. Yeah.
Not double.
Doesn't need to be double cooked, that's correct. In this case. Okay, let's look inside. Let's talk about somebody that doesn't have any liquidity. Somebody that has already, it's got liquidity to it. It gives off steam, it gives off aroma, and the whole orchestra there. And that's called Zeya. And halakha it's called Zeya, which means steam. Our concern is that the meat dish, right, they're cooking a roast uncovered. It's going to give off steam. It's going to touch the wall, the roof of the oven now. Okay. Now this oven becomes a meat oven. There's actual residue of meat in there. And now suddenly I'm going to do, let's say, bake some other par vegetables. Now the steam of that vegetables are going to go to the roof of the oven. They're going to start creating a bond. Now you have the steam of the meat and the steam of the vegetables come together. It's going to come back down into the food, and then it's going to be usher to eat that particular food. Then you cannot have those vegetables with dairy because they had a close encounter with meat. They're not actually meat in the sense we have to wait 6 hours, but they've had a relationship with meat that you cannot eat them together with dairy. We move on one more thing and then I'll take the questions. Both foods have steam and they give off aroma. If one of them does not give off steam, if it does give off steam, the pot is covered, and then steam does not go out to the oven, right? Because like that's the example I gave you with the Dutch oven. It's covered and therefore there's no steam issue. Okay, any questions? Yes.
So I think we discussed in the past that stardom holds that they could heat in hard, they both in no place and also inflation, so they can do it together.
That's if you don't have actual steam.
Okay, so the steam.
Let me explain what this means. You're asking a great question. You're helping me wrap my brain. The Sardim hold that a taste of meat may be mixed together with dairy. So, for example, if I took a clean meat pot, that's clean, and I cooked pasta in there, the pasta is receiving a taste of meat. The pot received a taste of meat, and the pot is exuding a new taste into the macaroni. So the macaroni is now carrying a grandchild of meat, right? An anical, mazel tov. So now this, according to the Sfardim, you're allowed to mix this with dairy, l'chatchila. The Ashkenazic way of learning is you're not allowed to do that l'chatchila. If they did get married, they can stay married. If you have it after the fact, but you're not allowed to do l'chatchila. But by an oven, it's different because by an oven, it's presumed not to be clean. Then you have residue. By residue, that halacha doesn't apply. You're strict.
And even if it's clean, the steam changes.
Because the steam is considered to be actual food. A pot has especially if the wife wants to clean the pots, it's for sure clean. The husband clean the pots, sometimes they need to be checked a little bit more afterwards. But it's presumed to be clean if it's in the cupboard, ready in the cabinet. Okay? Yeah. Yes. Any other questions? Yeah.
So if you put vegetables in an oven uncovered.
Right.
Is it an oven or part of the oven?
Right. So if the oven was clean, then the vegetables would be parred, truly parred. Yes. But that's only if the oven was clean. Most of the time the oven is not clean. So what I'll tell you is another hack. That if before you bake the vegetables, let's say the oven was used to bake bread, in the Dutch oven and the bread was covered. And they baked it for an hour at 500, that koshered the oven. So the next food that's being baked in there, if it's parv, will remain parv. But it's about being mindful what's going on in the oven. What's going on in the kitchen. It would be considered burnt out if you baked it for an hour, 500. That's how you kosher an oven from kosher to kosher. By the way, parenthetically speaking, koshering an oven from kosher to kosher, which would mean, let's say, from meat to parv, is a lot easier than kosherizing an oven from treif to kosher, or from chametz to Pesach, or even from meat to dairy. So it's pretty much accepted, as far as I know, I've seen in the writings of great halachic authorities, that in such a case, if I want to kosherize a kosher oven that's meat to parv, turn it on for an hour at 500 degrees, and that's considered to be enough to kosherize it. Yes, but to go from dairy to meat, or meat to dairy, there are those that say you should wait 24 hours without using the oven first, because you're not kosherizing with actual fire, you're kosherizing with heat. That's what I've seen written about it. Okay.
What about the comment to face off and not to trade?
That's another question. So since you asked the question, we'll touch on that. That's more complex. So what we say in that regard is as follows. If the oven has a self-cleaning feature, which you should hope it does, if it does have that feature, which means it gets up to about 900 degrees, that's a Liban Gomer temperature, complete fire, yes? Then we would say it needs Liban Gomer. We would say it needs Liban Gomer, it needs to be fully torched out. Now, if you take an actual torch and torch the oven, it's probably going to be the last time using that oven, unless you're careful to cover the thermostat and not burn the thermostat out. So that has to be done very carefully, and you have to have someone like a friend saying Tillim to do the whole time. Now, if you're going to torch it, but really just putting on the self-cleaning feature, it's fine. And if it's not a wall oven, it can pull it away from the wall a little bit to air it out. It's advisable. That's what we recommend people doing when they're koshering them from treif to kosher or from chametz to Pesach. If the oven does not have a self-cleaning feature, we tell people they're going to go hungry for the week. Okay, no. There are other things that they can do. They can double wrap the food, and they could torch the oven, which is very tricky and not recommended. The racks for sure have to be torched. There is an opinion that's lenient and says the actual cavity of the oven itself only needs to get the Liban Kal, which is 500 degrees. It's not something Chabad Rabbanim would really sanction as an opinion. So it depends who's asking the question. I'm giving you the scope of how that's handled. Yes.
When I koshered my treif oven, I was told to clean it with Easy Off. I spent like 2 hours cleaning it.
Yes.
And then it hadn't been used for at least 24 hours. It was longer, but whatever.
Right.
And then I let it run for an hour at 500. That was the highest it would go.
Right. So there are some poskim that hold that's permissible. And Chabad takes a bit of a stricter position on that and would hold that it would need like Liban Gomer. For sure the racks would need that. And you can do that either by torching the racks or buying new racks.
I did buy a blowtorch.
Okay, so if you someone torched the oven as well?
I did.
You torched the oven also. Okay, so then you did it in the best way possible. And the oven still survived. That's wonderful. Did you cover the thermostat? There's another trick I can tell you. If you're ever doing that, the thermostat has a wire sticking out in the back, lying, vertically from top to bottom. Clean the thermostat and then cover it with foil, like heavy duty foil. So it's not going to get direct heat. Okay, and then usually that will help from destroying the thermostats. No guarantees, but that helps. Yeah.
You can wait 24 hours before, after you put it at 500 degrees.
Now, in the case where you're koshering from kosher meat to kosher parv, you don't have to wait 24 hours, period. The case I gave before, let's say we're going from kosher meat to kosher dairy, then you clean it, and then wait 24 hours, don't use it, and then turn it on for an hour at 500 degrees. That's going from kosher to kosher, from treif to kosher, for more strict. Yeah.
Sorry.
It's okay. So I forget that my money's worth, then it's just all the question.
If like someone who is going through the Garris process, or a Jew, non-Jew who like keeps kosher style, uses an oven, is it like you kosher it the same way that it would be treif, or like,
They should speak to a rabbi to guide them in their process. Depends who's asking the question. But if someone is becoming, wants to do a Chabad standard, a Hasidic standard, we would guide them in the way I told you. There is an opinion that's lenient, but it says you can kosherize even an oven from traits by turning it on 500 degrees, cleaning it, of course, effectively. Even that, if someone's going to be lenient, we would tell them to change the racks or for sure torch the racks. The reason why they're lenient about the oven is because the oven itself doesn't get direct food contact, it only gets steam. That's why they're lenient about that. Okay, any other questions?
Saying like the olive oil is like an oasis, and we can have the challah later from the meal. Is that only if the challah isn't in the oven with like the meat dish and steam's not getting on the challah?
Correct. That's assuming that the challah came to the Shabbos table as a part status. If it was cooking and baking in the oven, together with meat, unopened, opened in a way where the steam and all that, then the meat will affect the bread in such a way where you're going to only be able to eat that challah together with meat, or you can have it with par foods, but then you cannot have it together with dairy.
Okay, and that's why the Dutch have a salad.
Correct.
Thank you.
That must be why Jewish people are eating so much sourdough.
Of
Any other question?
Can I ask these questions about like
Yeah, so we have a couple more minutes. So we'll stop at Halakha Vav. Can someone who's taking notes just make a note of that? Vav Vav. Go up to page Chav Zayin, Halakha Vav. Yes, go ahead.
So, cut onions with a dairy knife. Let's make it even more interesting, a flaking knife. The knife is clean. But you eat the onion, the onion may be flaking.
The onion carries what's called a tam rishon, a first taste of meat. And the onion may not be eaten together with dairy, but you don't have to wait 6 hours after eating the onion either. You can have dairy right afterwards, but not together.
So then why? I don't know what to do. Because if the onion has that strong, it's like a sharp food, and it carries over.
The residue taste.
Yeah, so like why is that different from cutting a carrot left there where you could still eat it hard?
The difference is because an onion has a sharp quality about it. So when you take a knife and you penetrate a vegetable, cutting into the onion, we have two things happening at the same time, simultaneously. I've got the penetration and the strong personality of the onion, that strong taste. So the combination of the penetration and the tam chorif, that will extract the taste that's absorbed inside of the blade of the knife into the onion. If on the other hand, if I only have one of those two things happening, I have the knife penetrating the carrot does not have a strong personality. It's not going to have the power to pull out the taste of the knife, and therefore the carrot would remain hard as long as the knife is clean. Okay, so we have another minute or two. I just want to wish everybody a Gmar Chasima Toiva. A meaningful fast. Yom Kippur is a wonderful gift from Hashem, by the way. Sure, it's obvious, but the day itself is the Day of Atonement, and the tefillahs are very, very beautiful. And if you have an English matzah, I highly encourage you to look inside, to read them, and to get comfortable. That's one point. And then the whole Tishrei is basically the battery pack for the whole year. We juice up the battery. The Ashpa, Sukkot is coming, Mitzvah Hashem. I don't think we'll have an opportunity to have class before Sukkot, so a lot of beautiful things happening in Crown Heights. The Rebbe Shuna and Hasidim would travel, they still do, come in to be by the Rebbe for the whole month. The time when people spend less time focused on business, more time focused on davening and Avodas Hashem. And I just want to share one story with you. If I may catch it before the shofar blows. I don't know if I'll be able to do that or not, but when I was in the 1980s, when I was a bacher, there was some older Chassidim that passed away in Tishrei. One of them passed away in front of the Rebbe, they call Nidre. A very holy time to go. I was like, well. So another Chassid who was also older and Sukkot's time by Simchas Beis Sheva, he felt that his time was, he just knew it was his time. So he walked to the Sukkah and he asked that his hat and jacket be put on. Put on that jacket. He laid down and he said, "This Chassid was by the Rebbe, Ramish in front. For me," he said, "for me, it's enough to be in the Sukkah." And he said about his name was Zusha Volomovsky. He said, "Zusha Ligtzach." Zusha's lying down, and he died peacefully in the Sukkah. But it's a happy time, and it's a time to fabring and to get a lot of hashpah, rayas for the whole year. And say one other story. I actually don't know. Maybe if the shofar will tell you after. When I was a bacher, we made a lot of trouble. And even the girls told chutzpah. You have to have chutzpah. Because you can't. How you go out there and put on tefillin on people and anyway. So we went on with Tzoyim on Sukkos to do with Tzoyim in a hospital. I was all but 15 years old, 14. I was a bit shy then. So they paired me up with another bacher who was like 16, very outgoing, not shy at all. Like he does what's got to be done. No questions asked. I knew I was good hands. Anyway, we went to Beth Israel Hospital, it's a Jewish hospital, non-Jewish hospital. Say, "Oh, it's wonderful you're coming with the lulav and the network for the Jewish patients," and they give you all the names. I mean, they're accommodate it. The Jewish hospital say, "Well, we have a Jewish chaplain, and you have to go through him. You get permission." The fellow was a former rabbi. I still remember his name, Rabbi Terry Bard. We had to meet with him first before we had permission to go to the Jewish patient and do this mitzvah. Anyway, we go to his office on Yom Tov. He said, "Oh, Rabbi, thank you for coming. We have a lulav and etrog here in my office. Any patient that wants to make the blessing can come down." I think to myself, the patients are hooked up to machines on beds. How about this? Going to now? Okay. I'll show from what I'm thinking about. It's already after Hashem. I'm sorry. No, because I'm used to class. There's always a show. Anyway, so I have another minute. So anyway, so they hooked up the machine. No one's going to come downstairs to blow show to a bunch of little mess with. So my friend says, "Okay," he makes believe, "Okay, we're just going to leave, no problem." So we leave the hospital, we leave the office of the chaplain, and then he takes me in through a side door, and we go to the top floor of the hospital and go to the nurse station, get names of all the Jewish patients, and we start going around the mitzvahim. Meantime, he says to me, "Okay, we get to the next floor." He says, "Okay, now we're going from floor 6 to floor 4. We're skipping floor, we're staggering it, so that in case security chases us, they won't be able to cop us." So we go to floor 4, and then we go back to 5 and to 3. By the time we're up to 3, the security, they catch up with us. Well, what's our crime? We're doing mitzvah. Doing mitzvahs anyway. My friend's like, "No, we have to leave on our own. No, sir, we have to escort you out the building." And that was the end of that. But I don't know the same story. But yeah, anyone who's shy, growing up in Lubavitch, the Rebbe's programs just have a way of curing that. No problem. Just a couple of years in Lubavitch and you're cured of that ailment. Yom Tov, all the brachas. Tzedakah for the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael, for all Yidden, the Hom Lakim She'im. Fine, okay, thank you.